Well, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, November 6th, and this is our midweek gathering. A few minutes that we share together on Thursday mornings just to check in. Hopefully, everybody is doing well. Been praying for all of you. I hope that that everything is going good and you're enjoying your week. This last Sunday, we began a new series called Thanks But No Thanks, where we are looking at the words of Paul in talking about gratitude. I want to highlight, we looked at Romans 14. I want to highlight verse 6 again for us this morning. It says, "Those who eat in honor of the Lord, since they give thanks to God, while those who abstain in honor of the Lord to give thanks to God." So if you joined us on Sunday, we talked about Thanksgiving in a divided world, how gratitude can unite the people of God even when our opinions and our backgrounds differ. This morning, I want to slow that down and explore one image that Paul gives us in Romans 14 that we didn't spend a lot of time with on Sunday. It's the image of the table, a place big enough for everyone God has welcomed. Because that's really what Paul is describing here. He is describing a place, what we would call today a church, but it was a group of people, a community, divided over what food to eat and what holidays to keep. But underneath all of it, Paul isn't talking about diet or ritual. He's talking about belonging, a place where you belong. The Roman church was made up of people from different worlds. Some from Jewish families who had been taught for generations that they had to worship on certain days, to avoid certain foods, not because they were picky, but because those boundaries reminded them of who they were. They were God's chosen people. And so it became an identity for them. Others who were part of this community were called Gentiles. In that world at that time, especially with the Israelite language, there were two classifications. You were Israelite, you were Jewish, or you were Gentile, which is everyone else who is not Jewish. So they didn't have these early Gentiles who were connected to this community. They didn't have that background, that history. They didn't grow up being told, don't eat this, don't eat that, because that defines who you are. And for them, Christ's freedom meant they no longer needed to live by any of those restrictions. So one group says, if you're truly faithful, you would honor the laws and not eat those things and worship on these days. The other says, if you really understood grace, you'd let those go. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? That is definitely an argument or a disagreement or a discussion we could be having today in 2025. They were all followers of Jesus. They just saw faithfulness differently. They saw their faithfulness differently. And into that mess, Paul writes in verse 4, he says, "Who are you to pass judgments on servants of another? It is before their own Lord that they stand or fall." In other words, Paul says, stop trying to manage someone else's faith. You don't sit in God's seat. You and I don't do that. We don't have that authority. We don't control the guest list at God's table. Think about that image for a moment, a table. As we get closer, now we're in November, as we get closer and closer to Thanksgiving, this idea of a table is very apropos. Think about the image of a table. When we gather around the table, it's not usually to argue, it's to share, to break bread, as some call it, to look one another in the eye and say, welcome, you belong here. You've been invited, you came, you belong here. But sometimes we forget that God's table is not ours to curate. It's not a potluck where we get to decide who brings what or who's worthy to eat. It's a feast where Christ is both the host and the meal. That means the person you struggle with, whether it's politically, personally, or even spiritually, God has invited them to the table as well. God has invited them to the table as well. It's never been our table. I heard a story of a church member who had a large wooden dining table, and it seated 12 people. That's a large table. Every Thanksgiving, she would add a card table at the end for the kids. One year, she said, "You know what? I think next year I'm just going to get a bigger table." And she smiled and said, "God's family keeps growing. I might as well prepare for it." What if we thought of the church like that? Instead of dividing into a main table, a kids table, an upstairs, a downstairs, a contemporary or traditional, a a traditional versus progressive, a liberal versus a conservative, or all these other things, whatever it is, right? Whatever we say, what if we just kept finding ways to make more room at the table? That's what gratitude does. It enlarges our table. When we give thanks for others, especially those who we disagree with or challenge us, we make space for God's work, for God's grace to work in them and in us. In the Greek text of verse 6, the phrase "give thanks" is Eucharisto. It isn't a polite gesture. Eucharisteo. It's not polite. It's a sign of spiritual maturity. It's what people do when they truly understand what grace is in their lives. In other words, the mark of a strong Christian isn't the one who wins the arguments. It's the one who gives thanks. That is the mark of Christian maturity. You want to show that you are strong. If you want to be strong, then you give thanks. Gratitude is the proof that grace has sunk in enough to change how we see each other. So Paul's real message is this: don't prove your faith by how well you debate. Prove it by how well you give thanks. That is how we live this in the world. So let's get practical. How do we do this? How do we show and live out Thanksgiving in a world that is absolutely divided? Right? It's not your fault. It's not mine. It is as it is. Well, a couple of things, a few things for us that we can do. First, give thanks for people, not just things. It's easy to thank God for the blessings, health, job, a house, but Paul invites us to thank God for each other, even those who test our patience. Maybe today your prayer could be, "Lord, thank you for the people I struggle with. Use them to teach me about grace." Use them to teach me about grace. So that's the first thing. Next, practice listening as a form of thanksgiving. Sometimes the most grateful thing that we can do is just listen. Not to respond, but to understand. When we listen to someone's story, we're silently saying, "Your voice matters to me." So we can begin by listening more. Next, guard our words. Thanksgiving and criticism can't live in the same sentence. Every time you choose to speak with kindness, you're participating in God's ministry of reconciliation. So we guard our words. Thanksgiving and criticism, again, cannot live in the same sentence. So we need to guard our words. And then last, pray before posting. Before you share that opinion online, which you're entitled to, we have to ask ourselves, can I do this in thanksgiving to God? If not, maybe silence is the more Christ-like act. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something all the time. Just because we can, and we can, and we are thankful that we can, but just because we can doesn't mean we should. Maybe silence is the more Christ-like act. That's hard in our world today, because there's that feeling that if I'm silent, then I am agreeing, or I am giving in, or I'm allowing it. I once heard of a woman who kept 2 chairs in her prayer room. She said one was for her and the other was for the person she was struggling to forgive. Every morning she'd look at that empty chair and say, "Lord, help me to see them the way that you do." Over time, she said that her anger began to soften. She began praying blessings instead of judgments. And eventually she invited that person over to the same table she had once wanted to avoid. That is what gratitude does for us. It changes the posture of our heart long before it changes anyone else. That's the key. We can only change ourselves. Before we close, take a moment to reflect. Who in your life do you think, do you struggle to thank God for right now? What would happen if you began praying instead of being frustrated? Or think about it like this: when do you see division in your family, church, or community that needs healing? Where do you see these places? Where do you see division, whether it's in family, at the church, or in a community? How might you start that healing with a simple act of thanksgiving? So let us close by being reminded in verse 19, it says, of Romans 14, it says, "Let us then pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding." Peace doesn't happen by accident. It's something that we have to cultivate, pursue. And gratitude is the path that we get there. So, some words and thoughts to think about this morning. I hope that's giving us something to think about for sure. We want to take a moment to close out in prayer. If you have any prayer requests, feel free to leave those in the comment section. But would you join me for some moments of prayer? Gracious and always present God, thank you for the ways that you walk with us, that you show us mercy, grace, and forgiveness. We're thankful for your love. We're thankful for the gift of this moment. And God, may we always recognize the ways in which you walk and bless us every day. Help us to have our eyes open, to have our hearts warmed, have our souls open to all the ways that we can be thankful. Help us to be people of gratitude who know what we have and are content with it all. That although life may not be easy and we don't have everything we want, we have everything we need in this moment. God, help us to live in gratitude, and help us as we grow in our gratitude, then let it spill over into the ways in which we show love and gratitude to our sisters and brothers. Yeah, we just take this time now to lift up all those for Miss Birdie recovering, for Tina Wilcox, for so many others, for Penny Bradford, and so many more, God. We lift them up to you this morning. We ask that you would continue to watch over all that are dealing with health issues, recovering from an illness, dealing with a loss, accepting change, or having difficulty in their work or home life. God, for all the ways that we hurt and go through so much pain, we just ask for your healing touch in our lives. Help us, God, to see each other, to carry one another, to care for each other as you care for us. For all of this, we give you praise, honor, and glory, and it's in your name that we give you thanks. Amen. Well, enjoy the rest of your Thursday and the rest of your week for that matter, and we'll see you right back here every Thursday, 8:30 a.m., and always every Sunday, 9 and 10:30. God bless. Have a great rest of your day.